Hi there, Paul. A long time ago, in a faraway land, a spinster who had been rejected by the man she had been pledged to marry and who had faced ridicule and mockery from society for losing her lover, unexpectedly fell in love with a respected farmer. The spinster, Vivianne, gave up on love and vowed she would never look at a man the same again when the young man she had been betrothed to eloped with another girl and married her instead. Her lover, Ngwedzi, had been the heir to a gold fortune, and Vivianne's parents had orchestrated the match when both Ngwedzi and Vivianne were hardly toddlers. As Vivianne grew into womanhood and came of age, her parents had lavished on her, buying her the finest clothes and the finest jewelry, hiring for her the royal hairdressers and the dressmakers, and purchasing for her potions and fragrances that were sweet, just so she could stand out amongst the other girls in the village. Every year, her parents had thrown a big party at the end of their harvest to celebrate another year of her life, and only the people within the top echelons of the kingdom would be invited. And at these bashes, Vivianne's parents made sure to parade her before her future in-laws so that they would not forget the pledge between the two families of the marriage match before them. And everyone would comment what a beautiful match they would make. But it had not been, Vivianne thought to herself now, sighing as she sat alone in her hut, watching the rain fall outside and wishing it would end and she would go back to her shed to work on her tools. It had been raining for 3 days straight now, and the whole courtyard was slippery and muddy, making it difficult to trek from her hut on one corner of the courtyard to her shed by the other end of the courtyard. She hated being far away from her tools, molding her iron into fire, creating hoes and harrows and axes and pots and pans. She missed the heat of the fire and the smell of iron, and resented being in her heart where all she had were morose thoughts that made her heart ache 8 years after Ngwedzi had gone forever and had never looked back for her. Thoughts that reminded her that all her age mates had since married and started their own families, and the younger girls whose noses and behinds she had wiped were all also starting their families. She had not noticed that her eyes had welled up with tears, and only when a splatter fell from her cheeks and onto her skirt did she realize she was crying. Not after so long, she cursed and chastised herself, wiping her eyes and her cheeks. You now have a job and a service you offer communities upon communities. You are no longer a little girl who cries over bygones. Be strong. When the next day she woke up, it was sunny, and she breathed in a sigh of relief as she did her chores around the house while the rest of the family prepared for another day in the fields. She cleaned the yard and prepared the meal they would eat once they got back before she retreated to her shed where she quickly stoked a fire in her furnace. On ordinary days, the shed would be full of students, but today she knew she would be alone as everyone would have gone to help their parents in the fields. She had so many orders, from farming tools to warfare arms, and from kingdoms far away from hers, as her skill as a blacksmith had spread and the strength of the tools she forged was revered. She knew that today she would have to work harder and faster to make up for the rainy days and to ensure her orders would be delivered in time. But no sooner had she donned her rawhide apron and sat down on her stool had a soft knock sounded on her door. "Come in," she called out, hoping it was not someone here for an order. In entered Huruza, the young farmer whose fame for green fingers had earned him the Farmer of the Year title year after year from the royal house. "Vivianne," he said, bowing slightly in greeting before sitting on a stool facing her, the signature easy smile on his face. Hurudza was a revered bachelor within the kingdom, and widows and young women paraded themselves before him all year long. As a self-made man, people had not given him much notice as he was growing up, as his family was one of those families with no known wealth or reputation, and who simply increased the population of the kingdom. But as he grew into manhood, he had become famous for engineering a stream to his family's fields, providing access to water all year round, that they always had a bountiful harvest and became known as farmers. He had gone on to amalgamate different seedlings and allowing them to germinate into new varieties of crops that were proving to be delicious to the kingdom and beyond. His ingenious thinking had also led to the crafting of new tools that were making farming easier across the kingdom. And because of this, his family name had risen within the ranks of society to become a respected name within the kingdom. Now, as he entered Veneco's shed, she said, "Hi and welcome." She was raking her head to see if perhaps he had made an order earlier, but only relaxed, remembering that his orders and repairs were made way before the rainy season even began. "What brings you here, my kind sir?" she asked. "To see your beautiful face, as always," he teased, adding, "If we don't come to see it here, we will never see it anywhere." "Oh, stop," Veneco said, knowing never to take the guy seriously, as he always teased there whenever he passed by. Hurudza laughed, then said, "I am looking for a special tool, my lady, something that will make me till my land quicker so I can produce better and better harvests for our kingdom." Veneco was looking at him with both curiosity and anticipation. Excitement always coursed through her veins whenever she had a challenging task before her. "What is it exactly that you want?" she asked. Hurudza stood and went to the walls that were darkened by soot and smoke and picked a piece of chalk on the window. Then drawing on the wall, he said, "It has to have sharp edges that can dig deep into the ground. Then it has to roll along like a wheel so that the user only has to hold a handle and push it gently into the ground and with minimum effort make maximum impact." With a thoughtful expression, Veneco stood and walked to the board where she helped him sketch the implement he had in his mind. The two haggled and argued for a while, until at last they had a sketch of a tool that they thought would be easy to create and easy to use. The two then sat, and Veneco brewed him a cup of Zumbani tea, and they spoke for a while of mutual friends and the ventures they were up to. When finally at mid-morning, as the first of Veneco's family began to return from the fields, Hurudza stood, and he said to Veneco, "You should get out more and see the village. This existence of remaining in a hot shed all day will ruin your beautiful face." Veneco nodded half-heartedly, hoping that would be enough for him and he would leave. But he continued, "We are having a celebration to honor my grandmother's life next Chisi at my homestead. Please do come and play with the other children." Again, Veneco nodded half-heartedly before saying feebly, "I will come." "If you don't," Hurudza warned her, "then I will come here and drag you out of this shed personally." And then he left. Veneco knew that she was not going anywhere. She did not want to face the outside world and be asked for the umpteenth time by one older woman after the other, "When will we see Mkwasha?" Or, "Do you want your parents to die before they hold your child?" Or be told, "Remember so and so, they got married," or they had a child, or were building their home with their husband. It was not that she didn't want to share in their joys. No, if at all, she was happy for all of them, but she hated that all this would be said in a manner that made her look like a failure. After Hurudza left, Veneco was left feeling more and more alone. How she craved company, companionship, and friendship, but that too had gone in the months after Ngwedzi had jilted her. She remembered venturing out of her parents' homestead a couple of weeks after Ngwedzi had married the other girl, and she had seen people whispering and laughing after her. Sometimes a whisper would be loud enough and she would hear it. "See how she walks? Now she has lost her one chance at marrying the rich man. She has been humbled by a man, this one. She is now one of us. She began loathing leaving the house after that, postponing any engagements she had with friends for the next day, then the next week, then the next month, then indefinitely. She retreated into her hut where she spent days on end, lying on her bed and looking up to the thatched roof until she knew the number of straws in the roof by head. She refused to eat the food that was brought for her, but when one day after 3 months, her mother and her aunt intervened, threatening ostracism, estrangement, and to use a kettle whip on her, she had finally eaten an entire plate of food on her own. Her fancy clothes could no longer fit, however, as she had lost weight, and she told herself she would return to the world once her clothes began to fit again. But even after her mother and her aunt had intervened, her moroseness continued, and nothing could lift her out of the melancholy mood she was constantly in. However, things came to a head one afternoon when, as she sat on the doorstep to her hut, playing Nodo with a 10-year-old cousin, she heard people shouting in the compound. At first, she tried to ignore the ruckus, but then she heard her father's voice pleading to the volume of the stranger's voice. Hurriedly, abandoning their game of Nodo, Veneko had rushed to the center of the ruckus. "I want my Jews now," the stranger, an elderly man who was wearing the wrist beads that men of status wore on their wrists, was shouting. "I can't be traveling from one part of the world to the next, collecting iron to give to you, but you don't pay me back. I do not work hard for charity. I have a family too that needs to be fed." "I am sorry, Onai," Veneko's father said. "I know the debt that I have is too much. I had hoped my daughter would marry, and I would finish the debt off with her ro'ora, your bride price. Now," Veneko's father's voice trailed off, and a sharp pang hit Veneko. But her father then continued, "Please, extend your debt, and may you please give me more favorable repayment terms. I will pay it off, Onai." The man named Onai laughed a mirthless laugh. "Where will you get the money for repayment? Your tool shed is almost empty of iron, as I have not delivered to you in over a month. As for your daughter, there is no hope she will get married soon, not after being jilted and embarrassed by a lover as publicly as this." Veneko's father was scratching his head for something to say and found nothing. But Onai was snapping his fingers in the air, and 2 young men stepped out of the shadows. "Take 3 oxen," Onai told the young man. "If the man does not return our money in 3 weeks, then we confiscate this and come to collect more to cover his debts." And Onai and the 2 men left with 3 cows. When Veneko had next seen her father that afternoon, he was sitting on his work stool in his blacksmith shed, and tears were pouring down his face. "I am sorry, Baba," she said to him, ashamed to see the man who always seemed so strong crying. "I wish things had gone on differently, and you had received the bride price." "It's not your fault," her father said, even though tears continued to stream down his face. "We were already struggling then." It had been then when Veneko learned the true extent of her father's debt. He owed everyone in the village, from skin tanners to farmers whose grain he had borrowed, to hunters who brought him buffalo and deer, to gatherers who brought him the best fruit. His blacksmith trade had not been enough to sustain the family's wants, and as his daughter was to marry into a wealthy family, he had hoped to cover some of the debt with the ro'ora. "I don't even know what we shall do now," her father said, brushing his tears away brusquely. Veneko had stood and looked around the shed, seeing pieces of scrap metal lying on the ground and unfinished hoes and axes and other iron implements in different stages of work. She had remembered the lessons of blacksmithing she had learnt at her father's knee as a young girl, and how she had loved spending time with him in the shed, helping him with the little tasks. Until one day, her mother had forbade her from the shed. "That is no place for a girl child," her mother had said, "especially one who will marry into a good family." And her mother had seen to it that she would never return to the shed again. But then, as she stood with her grieving father, all the lessons on the number of fire hours needed for a piece of metal to become pliable, and how the anvil had to be held to create the best shaped implement or tool, returned to her. "Let me help you, Baba," Veneko suggested. "Let me help you finish up the tools here, and you can sell them and get some income to help pay off the debt." But your father had vehemently said no to the suggestion, as too had your mother when she learnt of it. In fact, her mother had said, "I do have the perfect idea on how to solve this issue." Veneko remembered the embarrassment of her mother's perfect idea, for unbeknownst to her, her mother had approached Mwedzi's mother and offered her daughter as Mwedzi's second wife. She remembered how she had arrived at her ex's family home, confident that he was away on some military mission, only for him to return home. And when his mother suggested that he take a second wife, he had blatantly refused and chosen his wife again. And oh, the shame of the rejection. Veneko had further retreated into a shell. But it was the visit from the seer that further strengthened Veneko's resolve to never venture into the outside world, but to work hard and hand in hand with her father to try and clear his debts. The charlatan had come a week after the disastrous visit to Mwedzi's family, and he had brought with him a bag of bones and a looking glass. After throwing the bones for Veneko, who sat on a reed mat beside him, he instructed the young woman to look into the looking glass, and when she had stared at her reflection long enough, and was confused as to what else she was supposed to see, the man had begun to shiver and chant, "No, no, 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 no." Fearful, Veneko asked him, "What is it that you see?" "Disappointment," the man had said, shaking his head. "Disappointment, dejection, darkness. There is not a single hope for you. A spell has been cast upon your life, and it has made your future unbearable. You shall wander across this world aimlessly, like a leaf that has been torn off a tree, and go wherever the wind leads, but find no permanent home. All the men that you shall meet will not see a beautiful woman on you. Instead, they will see an old woman limping on your cane, and thus they will not approach you. You shall die alone and childless." He shook his head again and ended, "There is no future for you, my child." "What then can I do?" she had asked the seer. "Pay me," he said. "I need a strong stomping head, because the spirits I will have to fight are strong and too powerful." Veneko gasped then said, "We do not have a head that we can give away now, but perhaps we can make an arrangement where we pay twice annually." She knew that more and more creditors had come to the home, demanding payment, and their head had significantly dwindled, and they didn't have much to pay the seer with. But the seer objected to the twice annual payment and told the family to call him once a head was ready for him. Before he left, however, he had stared straight into Veneko's eyes and said, "Good luck. You are going to need it." The seer's visit had been enough for Veneko to convince her father to join him in his blacksmithing shed, and she worked hard, from morning till evening, molding, straightening, bending and shaping the different tools. Her father would then take these tools into the market to sell them, and bit by bit they began to clear debts upon debts. Her designs became famous, and people began to choose her tools over the tools of other blacksmiths, and her work began to make her proud, and in some way fill in the gap, the deep void within her that nobody else could reach. And she also began to cherish the young man who had come forward to learn blacksmithing from her and enjoyed the camaraderie that they brought to the shed. They were judgmental when they first arrived, looking at her condescendingly and patronizingly, for she was a woman and yet knew of the craft better than they did. But with time, and begrudgingly too, they began to accept her and called her sister and brought with them little gifts from the world outside to thank her for all she taught them. Now, as she prepared for Chisi at Huruza's homestead, a part of her was filled with trepidation. She had not been out in society for the longest time. How would people view her now? But a part of her was resolved to show face today. Yes, she had not married, and yes, all the younger girls who had been born after her now had 2 or 3 kids, but it did not stop her from being human. Unmarried as she was, she too was worthy to be in any place as anybody else in the village. So when she had arrived at the lavish home, she had expected the stirs, the whispers, and the questioning glaze. But to her astonishment, nothing came, and so with a smile, she greeted them all, walking around and asking them of their lives. She sat with the older women and listened to their stories and laughed with them. She was so determined not to feel pity for herself at this event. She knew something that they did not, blacksmithing, and it had played a part in saving her family from even greater shame. So even though she had no husband and no children, she was still an integral part of this community. She had been sitting with the older women eating hot sadza and cow liver when she spotted Huruza speaking to another man in what seemed to be a serious conversation. As the 2 men shared a drink from a gourd, Huruza's eyes met Venekor's, and his face softened, and a hint of a smile played on his lips, and he gave her a little wink. Despite herself, she smiled back at him before returning to the conversation of how mischievous boys were when compared to girls that flowed around her. Later, as the sun began to set, and exhausted from having engaged in so much conversation in one afternoon than she had had in years, she decided to sneak away and go back to her home. But as she reached the homestead's gate, she heard a soft, warm voice say behind her, "And why are you running away without bidding us farewell, miss?" She turned around and saw Huruza leaning against a wall by the outer hut and looking so much as if he were hiding from the partygoers. "Why are you hiding?" she asked, laughing. "Isn't this your family's ceremony?" He walked to her, laughing sheepishly, and said, "I got tired of talking. I just needed some space." He took her arm in his. "Come, let's watch the sunset. It is too glorious an afternoon for you to go back into your dark and hot shed to work." She knew she would have ordinarily refused, but I had a feeling of having spent an afternoon with other people and not having been asked once when she would marry made her reckless, and she followed him to the small veranda of the hut that hid them from the rest of the people around the homestead. For a long moment, they were both quiet, looking at the glowing red orb shifting further and further away from them. Then Neko allowed herself to take a deep breath, reveling in the serenity of the moment, wondering why she had never taken the time to enjoy the sunset alone. She had to admit to herself there was something soothing about this moment, particularly the understanding that this day was over, but a new day would come. She turned to look at Huruza, expecting to see the same serenity on his face as he watched the sun, but instead, she was startled to see him watch her, his eyelid hooded and a small smile on his lips. For a brief moment, they stared at each other, the smile on his face growing wider, while a slight confusion set on hers. They opened their mouths at the same moment, but he said, "You were made for sunsets. You should have seen how your entire face glowed as you watched that." But she was standing up, becoming more aware of her surroundings now and the throbbing chatter of the festivities behind them. "I should go now. she said. Again he put his hand on hers to stall her, standing to and asking her, "Why would you leave so early? Stay for a while." She chuckled, then said, "I have a lot of orders for the next coming days, and my interns and students and my father are busy in their fields, of which this is peak tool season. I want to rest early so that tomorrow I will be ready for the day." While this was true, she knew too that the reason she was leaving so early was because she was afraid of what people would say if they saw her with Huruza. Another rumor to feed the never-ending kingdom gossip meal, and she knew it would be her they would accuse of ensnaring a man, and no, she didn't want to fuel the fire. But Huruza was nodding too, and he said, "I understand your pressure, but let me accompany you back home." Veneko did not want to object loudly, though inwardly she was objecting. Instead, she allowed him to walk her out of the gate, and she chose a brisk pace that had them almost jogging. When they reached their homestead, it was almost dark outside and there was no moon, and she said to him, "Thank you for inviting me and bringing me back home tonight." He smiled. "Thank you too for honoring the invite. I was not sure you would come." She nodded and whispered, "Bye," and walked into the yard. But the next day, she received a visit from him again, and he wanted to find out if his tool was progressing well. And he came the next day, and the following day, and the next 3 weeks after. And all the time, they would sit in Veneko's shed, just the two of them, as all the other interns were in their fields, and they would exchange stories, him of what was going on in the outside world, and her of her life in the compound. "You should get out more," he would extol her. "Hang out with your friends, not just remaining here all cooped up. This job will make you mad." She was too embarrassed to tell him that she didn't have friends anymore, that they had moved on with their lives, and she wouldn't have anything in common with them anyway. But the thing she began to cherish the most was his respect for her work. Not once had he belittled her job, or had she had to explain over and over why she had chosen a certain design over another. It had taken her years to eventually win her father's trust with his tools, even though her designs were being accepted by farmers and miners and warriors and wives and mothers around the kingdom and beyond. It had taken her even longer for the young man she taught to accept the lessons, and sometimes she would hear them snigger behind their back, taking counsel from an unmarried woman, and they would laugh out loud, disregard their advice, and create the implements and tools they wanted. So she found it strange when Huruza failed to conform to the norms of the men around her, and when he listened attentively to the guides she said about his tool, allowing her the creativity and free will to do what she thought best, she realized she was beginning to like him. Unwittingly, she found herself being more and more drawn to him, to his laughter, to his presence, and to his talk. She found herself smiling and laughing more whenever he was around, way more than she had ever done in the last 8 years of seclusion, and she looked forward to his ready smile whenever he visited, of which his visits had become a daily routine. But when she started to grow dependent on his visits, to look forward to the times he would come early in the morning and to brew tea in advance of his visit, she knew she had to still herself in. She looked at herself in the mirror as the kettle of hot water bubbled by the fire, and realized that her face had become softer. But it was this softness that she looked at and got scared of, because she remembered the soft girl who had become disappointed and hurt and had retreated back into the shadows. She didn't want to be that girl anymore, because she knew what it was like to be deep and never having a chance to get out again. She also knew that it was never going to lead anywhere with Huruza, and it would be just another set of disappointment, and she wanted to protect herself from that. So looking in the mirror, she practiced what she would say to him. I think you should stop coming here, she said to a reflection. What will people say if they see you here every day? She shook her head. She couldn't say that to a customer. It would be too rude. So she thought again and looked over at the harrow she was making for him that was almost done. If she finished it, there would be no need for him to come back again. So for the next few days, she stopped all orders and concentrated on his harrow. And when he came, she tried not to laugh as much or smile as much or talk as much. She concentrated on her work and told him she had so many orders that she needed to finish his orders soon, and so did not engage in as much talk as she had done previously. Are you okay? He asked her, sensing the change in mood, and she had nodded before he asked her again. Are you sure you are okay? But despite her assurances that she was okay, he still insisted that she did not look too good and told her, Look, you are someone I have come to care deeply for, and when you look and feel down, it also affects me. Please tell me what is wrong. Perhaps I can make it better for you. Startled by the kind words, but still wanting to keep the veneer of strength that she had built, she mumbled, I am fine. But he slid closer to her and looked into her eyes. There is something you are not telling me, Veneko, he said. But when she shook her head again, he took her work-roughened hands in his and swallowed before saying, I love you, Veneko. Startled, she jumped out of her seat and went to stand by the wall as far away from him as possible. Stop, she said. Stop that. Don't ever say it again. He shook his head, then said, I can't not say it because it is the truth. I have loved you for the longest time, even when you were still pursuing Medzi. I knew then that you and I could never be together because your parents wanted a better match for you. He scratched his head and sighed. When your match with Medzi failed to sail through, I wanted to approach your parents, but by then you had retreated from society. All this while, I have not married because I have not seen any woman who I like more than you. Please, allow me into your heart and help me bring honor to your name and your family. But Veneko was pointing at the door and saying, Leave. Please leave, Huruza. He looked at her for a while, then realizing the seriousness in her expression, he stood and walked to the door. Think about it, Veneko, he said softly, closing the door behind him. But after he left, she sank to the floor and clutched her chest where she could feel her heart dangerously fluttering. She didn't want to admit it to herself, but she knew that his presence was beginning to affect her badly. She did not sleep that night as she worked on finishing the harrow, as she didn't want to see him again. She topped up her oil lamp over and over again until at last she was satisfied with her creation. It was almost dawn when she set the harrow down, and too tired to trudge to her room, she took a nap on the cold floor. She must have closed her eyes for just about a second when she heard a loud and frantic rap on her door, and before she roused herself properly, the door had been shoved open and her mother was marching in, a mad fury in her eyes. Before Veneko could ask, What is it, Amai? Her mother's fury flew out of her mouth. You do not tire of shaming us, do you? The older woman was half shouting, half flying. Veneko was desperately trying to shake off the sleep out of her eyes as she tried to comprehend what the older woman was saying. What had she done? She was thinking to herself. All she had done was keep her head down and try to stay out of everyone's face. She had no time to ask her mother, as already the woman was explaining. First, you fumble an important marriage match. Then you go on to carry out a role that only men should, further making yourself unmarriageable. Now, you become the talk of the entire kingdom by gallivanting with a single man, opening your legs up to him while everyone else is in the fields. Does your shame know no bounds, Veneko? All the startled Veneko could say was, What are you talking about, Amai? You think I do not know about Huruza? Her mother was saying. You think I have not heard that the moment we leave for the field, you sneak him into our yard and gallivant with him, huh? Amai, Feneko said, trying to put in a word, but her mother was too inflamed to listen. Do you want your father and I to die of shame when we are buried because we have failed to suffer from further humiliation? Will you be happy? Amai, Veneko said again. Huruza is just my friend. A friend? Hey, your mother laughed, although no mirth crossed her face. A male friend? Tell me, how does it work? You ostracize all the women in this community who could be your friends to be around a man you call a friend? What type of insanity is that? Amai, I do not expect you to Of course, I cannot understand what happens when a man and a woman are friends. What do you talk about, huh? Do you share with him the sacred secrets of womanhood, and does he do the same? Do you talk about his job or your job? What could possibly interest the both of you so much that you become friends, huh, Veneko? Do you think I was born yesterday that you choose to lie to me so? Veneko did not know how to respond, and the two women stared at each other for the longest time. Then, sighing, her mother sat down. What are we going to do now, my daughter? How will your father and I show our faces in public? Veneko said in a low voice, Amai, trust me, I did not do anything wrong. Her mother looked at her for a while, then drew closer to sit beside her, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. I trust you, my dearest daughter. I know how committed you've become to your job, and I know you are telling the truth. But my daughter, the kingdom does not know you as I do. They are calling you a wretched woman and all sorts of ugly names. They are saying you have been spoiled and you are now an untouchable. Any prospects you might have had of marrying are now gone. Poof! There is no hope for you anymore. Amai, Feneko took her mother's hand in hers. I do not wish to marry anymore. She felt her mother flinch as she said these words. I have come to terms with my life, and difficult as my decision is, I hope you will accept it. Amai, I have worked so hard to lift this family from the dire straits of poverty it had been plunged into. And I hope the heads of cattle and goats and the fowls that we have accumulated will cover my bride price. What about children, companionship in old age? There is no guarantee for that, Amai. You know that. Amai, remember this year? Remember how you told me I would never find a husband and I would roll along the world like a leaf torn off a tree? Remember how when we went back to look for him after we had amassed heads and we wanted cleansing, he had already passed? Amai, I've already accepted my fate. It is time for you two to accept the inevitable. Her mother was quiet for a while, then said, Be that as it may, my child. We have been shamed. That afternoon, she knew Huruza would come to collect his implement, so she called her cousin back from the fields and gave him the tool to give to Huruza. She knew she would not be able to face him, so she watched his interaction with her cousins from her bedroom window. Veneko had underestimated the length of shame her mother had talked of until a week later. On market day, she gathered her wares and together with an intern had gone to sell in the market. She had hardly ever been here, but her father had wounded himself with an axe in the field and could hardly walk, so she had come in his stead. She had always had people speak and giggle behind her back, but had managed to hide her ire and her pain in inward grimaces of displeasure. But now she could hear their sniggers as they made no attempts to hide what they were saying. Wretched old hag, they said while laughing, always trying to ensnare the rich ones even in her old age. Imagine, another was saying, they say that she has a herb doctor that has given her potions, and once a wealthy man looks at her, he has no option but to fall for her. She locks the door to her blacksmith's shed when a wealthy man enters. My brother told me, another voice said. She gives them no option but to stay inside until she has used them to her heart's desire, and they can no longer look at any woman besides her. Yes, someone said. The boys and men she teaches have confirmed that she is an enchantress, and they rub potions to ward off her unlucky charms. They loudly told the people who stopped by a store, "Don't buy there," and people would mumble and walk away. The conversations continued amongst the sellers and their customers, and for the longest time she tried to ignore them and to hold the tears in. But by mid-morning she could no longer rein them in, and abruptly brushing away a tear, she told her in turn, "Hold the fort," then gathered her skirts as if to run. But a familiar voice stopped her before she had completed her first step as it boomed across the market. "Veneko," the voice said. "Wait." She turned to see Wuruza standing in the center of the market, and a part of her wanted to run even faster, while another part froze her to the spot. Powerless, as indecision gripped her, she watched him walk towards her, while the buzz and chatter of the market fell away and everyone turned to look. First at Huruza as he strode across the market as though he owned it, then at Veneko, who was just standing there, looking lost. For a long moment, the two of them looked at each other, oblivious to the market around them, and again Veneko felt a dangerous flutter in her heart that she knew she could not control. Then Huruza turned to the market goers and sellers who were all eyeing him with interest and said, "People of Kara, you who love peace and have always preached love, I have learnt of the disheartening way in which you have treated Veneko here, who has done no one any wrong. I do admit my wrong in pursuing this honorable woman without the permission of her parents, but I also wanted to have her heart first before I could talk to them, because I was afraid that they might force her into a relationship she did not care for. Little did I know I was doing more harm than good, and that you would view both her and I as dishonorable. People of Gara, if you do have to look at anyone in dishonor, then let it be me, not her, for she has done no one any wrong." There was a silence so packed in the marketplace that Veneko thought she would suffocate from it. The pangs in her heart went into overdrive as she began feeling feelings that she had thought no longer existed. She tried to calm herself down, but her mind was not listening as the giddiness in her heart was making her hurdy. But Uruza was still speaking, and this time not to the crowd but to her, but still in a loud voice that everyone could hear. "Veneko," he said, "I know I have told you this before, but I could sense your fear, and I vowed not to repeat it until I believed you were ready to hear it." "Veneko," he swallowed and continued, "I have known you for the longest time, but it has only been in these last months that I have felt drawn to you. I have fallen for your laughter, which, even though it does not come often enough, as a melody that can lift one out of their melancholy. Your wisdom and your sound mind has made me see the world beyond the peripheral vision I've always seen it in. Your hands have molded and shaped not just my life and my livelihood, but those of the thousands in this market and beyond. And your eyes, Veneko, even though they are a pool of sadness, are the softest and kindest eyes I have ever encountered in my life." He took her hand in his, and with the other she surreptitiously wiped the tears that flowed down her face. He continued, "If you will allow me, Veneko, if you will open a corner in your heart for me, then I will enter and erase all the pains of the past and allow our love to blossom. If you will allow me, Veneko, I pledge here before the people that I will wipe the tears off your face and bring an everlasting light to your eyes. I will honor your parents and your ancestors, and I will welcome you into my home and my life with joy and jubilation. Please, Veneko, change your mind and make me one with you. Allow me to love you. As he made this declaration, Veneko had forgotten to wipe her tears as they flooded her face. With them too, she could feel her soul being cleansed, being wiped free of her pain, and as though the past had never happened, she felt her face break into a smile and then a grin as she said, "Yes, Wuruza, I open my heart to you, now and forever." The end. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. See you in the next one. Bye.